Yes? Okay. My name is Linda Hewitt. First of all, I'm just like so happy to see old names that have been coming to this program for over, 5 years, and a lot of new names. And it's just really glad to see. One of the things we're going to do before I go on with some of the things that I need to talk about is Kerwin Webb, who's on our committee, is going to just review some of our Zoom procedures for this evening. Kerwin?
All right, so hi everyone, welcome to our program. These guidelines are designed to help ensure that we can get the best presentation so that everyone can hear our panelists and so that you can engage at the appropriate time. So if you would please follow these guidelines, we would greatly appreciate it. First, we want everyone to be muted during the presentation except for the panelists. That way we can hear clearly what the information they're giving to us, and we can respond appropriately as necessary based on that. Second, videos work if your computer is situated on a desk or a table at eye level. Some people want to have the opportunity to see your face as you are engaging. And so if you want to do that, try to make sure your phone is stationary. Sometimes if you're moving up and down or we're looking at a ceiling, it gets distracting from the panelists. There are multiple options for you to watch the program. On your speaker view, the box will exclude everyone except the active speaker. If you turn your computer or your program to speaker view on Zoom, you will only see that person who is speaking. But if you change it to gallery view, you'll see the smaller boxes where you see more faces. We invite you to participate, so chat in the chat box if you have questions during the presentation, and we will try to have someone to field them and for the Q&A portion, or if you just have a thought that you want people to pay attention to. And then finally, at the end of the session, there will be a Q&A session where we can ask the panelists, and the program ends at 8:30, but sometimes if the conversation goes along, you are invited to stay with those who will continue discussing if that happens. Again, thank you for coming tonight, and I turn it back over to Linda.
Okay, thanks so much, Kerwin. First of all, I just want to say we did a program about 3 years ago, same title as tonight, and it was interesting. At the time, we had a panel of young people. And, I went home often after these programs, I mull everything over, and I was just so frustrated because everybody kept saying, oh, young people have no prejudice. Young people, it's all different now. And at the time, I didn't feel like that. I felt I have young people and they don't have as much, certainly, prejudice. But the bottom line is, if you're a prejudiced parent and you're raising children, generally, they're going to be prejudiced. I mean, they might change 20 years later when they see the world. But for that time, like I live in a town, and whenever they had an election, it was generally Republican. And these were like 7-year-olds. So parents influence their children. And if you have prejudice, you have prejudice in your children. So here we are, 2020, and maybe one good thing that's coming out today is there is a lot of prejudice, and whether it be young children or older people. So we're revisiting the subject today, which is probably a really good thing. But so that just reflecting back to the way things were and how we progressed as we go into tonight's discussion. One thing we always do is just say we have all kinds of programs going on at the library, and especially during this time when things have shut down, if you're on Facebook, there's a lot to do with the library. So please get on Facebook. If you're not, go on our registration page, see our programs, and join us, because I know I'm a little biased, but they're really good. Young children's, YAs, and adults. So, please do that. Another thing is we keep looking for young voices. You know, young people are determining our future, and we want them with us on programs like this. And also, we're starting a new program called Let's Talk About Change, where you talk about the environment and a lot of things that are, you know, facing, you know, future discussions. So if you know anybody that's young and anybody that wants to get involved and be a leader in their community, please refer them to the Red Bank Public Library. Another thing is that I often hear like, oh, you know, the government's really big, and as one voice, you really can't do that much. So tonight's program, I just have to say that everybody that's been with us over 5 years, both our panelists, our participants, they're heroes. Like, they're one person, but they've made like unbelievable differences to their community. So you can't just say, oh, I can't get involved, I really don't know. As one person, you can make a really big change. So tonight we have 2 people on our panel, both of whom I know quite well, and I know they're really heroes. And I think you're going to really enjoy their story. One person I do have to say a little something about, and that's Sira Williams. When Sira came to the library, it was such a different library than it is today. A lot of you know adult programs, but if you go on anything that the Red Bank Public Library is with children, you know, like, she's a star. She's a superstar. She like loves everybody. She invites every single kid into that library and makes them know they're welcome. She has changed the whole collection. So if you want a book about yourself and you're not white, you have a book about yourself. I mean, the whole library's really addressed that. But I mean, I just personally just have to say that, you know, she is such a hero, and she has done so much for the whole Red Bank community. And although Patty's going to introduce her and let you know all the things she's done, I'm just telling you personally, she's a fabulous person. So welcome to tonight. I hope you really enjoyed the program, and thanks so much for coming. And I pass it over to Patty White.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. So Sira, no pressure, right? You're the bestest. Before I introduce our panelists, I do want to acknowledge our little committee. We are a team that have been working on this program. We just celebrated 5 years of a monthly Let's Talk About Race program at the library, and we have really addressed some very challenging and serious issues, just as this program tonight will. Linda Hewitt is the staff librarian for programming, and it was really her idea to start this program 5 years ago. So we're just kind of helping her along. But I want to acknowledge Joe Lockett and Mamone Christian, Kerwin Webb, Susan Boyce, Walter Grayson, Claire Phelps, and Dawn, I'm sorry, I can't remember Dawn's last name, Claire and Dawn also work at the library. The rest of us are volunteers and find that this is very important, satisfying service to the community. So we're going to have Sira do her presentation first, and then Ann Kelterborn. So as Linda said, Sira has been working at the Children's Library in the public library, where she has been there since 2011. So Sira is actually from the Bay Area in California, attended Tufts University and Rutgers School of Communications, Information, and Library Studies. She now lives in Red Bank with her husband, and where she raised her 3 daughters, Kayla, Julia, and Maya. In Sira's work at the Red Bank, at the library, she plans, coordinates, and conducts most of the children's programming, her favorite being story time. She actually has a program called Family Story Times on Race and Diversity, which anybody can see either via the library website or on Facebook. I don't know if you have another venue, but all of those shows are available for your little kids to watch, as well as those of us who could use a little more education. The other thing that Sira has become known for is a project she started in a nearby park. If you've ever been to the Riverside Gardens on Front Street, just a few spaces down from the library, there's a story walk. And every month, Sira selects another children's book that is posted on about, I think, 12 or so. You can explain more about it, Sira.
18.
But each page of the book is copied and placed at different spots where the children and the family can read them. And it's been, it actually won an award from the New Jersey State Libraries Association. In any event, this particular project is dear to Sira's heart because of the way it connects the library to the greater community and encourages literacy, activity, and fun all at the same time. And in that vein, she is very mindful of the diversity of our patrons and is determined that the children's room should be a warm and welcoming place for all children and their families. Outside of work, she's been involved for the last 20 years as on the trustee on the board of the Monmouth Daycare Center right in Red Bank, and a Sunday school teacher at St. Thomas Episcopal Church in Red Bank. She's also served as a Girl Scout leader and PTO president. And it is this dedication to supporting the growth and well-being of our youth that has inspired Sira to do this wonderful work. Ann Kelterborn, I don't know as well, but I think she's going to be my new best friend. She is going to do the second part of this program. She is a teacher, a Red Bank resident, and a parent of 2 sons. Her 19-year career in education began in Brooklyn. She currently teaches now at the Monmouth County Vocational School District. So she started with middle school, now teaches high school. Believes in encouraging students to express their unique voices so they can be active participants in their communities. And on that note, this is what we, as Linda touched on earlier, you don't necessarily require special qualifications if your heart wants to do something of service. And that's really what we hope you all come away from these programs with that in mind. Last year, Ann facilitated an equity-focused professional learning community in her school, and she is committed to designing a curriculum that reflects the multitude of perspectives and diverse experiences around the entire globe. She sees education as a lifelong endeavor and has never stopped learning from her own students, as well as her children who attend the Red Bank Public Schools. This past summer, she participated in a workshop series, which was offered by the Institute for Racial Equity and Literacy and Facing History. And she considers this type of training in anti-racism to be vital for educators who are committed to this work. Thank you so much, Sira. It's all yours. And then Ann, please join in. After that, we're going to have audience question answer conversation.
Okay, here I am. Thank you. Thank you. First to my friend Linda, who I work with and love. And thank you to Patty and all of the Let's Talk About Race Committee for inviting both Ann and I to speak tonight. This is a really important topic for me. And I think that we're going to have a good discussion. So I'm going to start just by giving you a little background on myself so you get a picture of where I come from as far as diversity and growing up goes. So my early life is kind of a picture of diversity. On the face of it, my mom was white, my dad was Black. My mom was from America and my dad was from Mali, that's a country in West Africa. My mom was Christian and my dad was Muslim. And I'm just going to stop there because that's a lot of diversity right there. And that was actually too much diversity for them because they got divorced. when I was 3 and my brother was a baby. So in spite of all of that, I ended up growing up in a very white community in California. Um, and really from kindergarten through high school graduation, I was the only Black person in any classroom that I sat in all those years. And so I personally didn't um, have a reckoning with race and myself until I went to college. Um, and it was at that point when I discovered for myself that I was much more comfortable in a room full of white people than I was in a room full of Black people. I just felt like I had no frame of reference to connect with those kids. Um, but all of that is to say that that changed, and I did find a comfortable place for me in the Black community. But I definitely can close my eyes and remember that feeling of discomfort in confronting issues of race. Um, what I learned for myself and what I think is applicable to all of us, no matter what our background is, where we come from, what our culture is, how we identify, is that with time and communication and experience and friendship and education, we can find connections with people and we can learn to appreciate and celebrate our differences. And so that's the direction that we want to move in, because when we talk about raising kids who are without prejudice, it starts with us being without prejudice. And so we're not really talking solely about kids tonight. We're talking about all of us and the journey that we're all on in getting to that place. So I'm just going to be sharing some of my thoughts and approaches that I've used in my family and in my work, and hope that you find something useful for you and your families in that. And I want to start by kind of challenging our goal of raising kids without prejudice and taking it to another level and saying we want to raise kids who are anti-racist. And that means that they are not only open and accepting of others, but they also know where they fit in to the racial paradigm of these United States, whether they're white or Black or Asian or Latinx, and that they're ready, willing, and able to stand up and speak out against racism and discrimination when and where they see it. So with that, I do want to share my screen and share an image with you that kind of illustrates the importance of that. Can everybody see this image? Okay, so this is a screenshot from an Instagram post that my daughter saw. It's from a girl that I know who used to come to the library. I know her family. She's a sweetie. And she just posted, it was a video, a quick pan of her classroom, hustling and bustling, getting ready for the day, and just said, "Happy Friday." Now, do you guys see what this image is saying? Because my daughter, who is Black, just zoned in on that image that was on the whiteboard in the background of this busy classroom, and contacted her friend and said, you know, "Do you know what's on your Instagram?" And she was horrified. She was so upset, almost, tearful. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I didn't know what that meant. I didn't even see that. I'll take it down. I didn't mean to offend anybody." And, she took it down. Now, the girl went to a different high school. I didn't, follow up in any other way. But this is my point, is that we don't want, I'm pretty sure we can all agree on this, we don't want our kid to be the one that drew that picture. We don't want our kid to be the one standing next to that kid going, "That's funny." And we don't want our kid to be the girl who, mindlessly posted it on Instagram. And we also don't want our kid to be the one sitting in the classroom who sees it on the whiteboard, who knows what it says and just goes, it doesn't have anything to do with me. I don't need to do anything about that. We want our kid to be the one that stands up and says, hey, take that down. Oh, what? It's funny. There's no Black people in here right now. It's okay. No, it's not okay because it offends me. It's racist. Take it down. Right? That's the kid we're going for. And so it's this kind of behavior, though, that we've begun to see more and more of, to Linda's point, over these last few years, along with the never-ending videos of racist incidents and police brutality and the horrible murder of George Floyd, along with the crazy, horrible behavior of Amy Cooper in Central Park that happened around the same time. All of these things together just had me as an emotional wreck by springtime of this year. And I just didn't know what to do because I felt like I couldn't be silent about these things, but I didn't know what to do about that. And I had a conversation with one of my friends, and she suggested that I just find a way to use my voice in a way that was comfortable for me. And so, in sitting with that, I came to the realization that I know books. I know a lot of good books. I know kids. I know families. There's something that I can do here. So my first foray into trying to use my voice. Let me see how I can make my. There we go. Was to write this blog post for our library's website, reading about race with your kids. I think this is actually a link. And at the bottom of this, oh, why is this not going to work for me? Okay. At the bottom of this article is a really good reference of books for kids for all ages. Hopefully you can make it to our website and seek this out if you're interested. But also at that time, I recorded this video. I'm going to play it for you. It's like 1.5 minutes, and let's just watch it real quick.
It's really important to me that I show you just some of the amazing books that exist for children of all ages that might be helpful to you as parents during this troubling time. Offering a diverse collection of books has always been a priority for me as a children's librarian. Ours is a diverse community, and I want to make sure that our kids see themselves in the books that they find at the library. It's so important to do that in order to nurture and bolster their sense of self and pride. But it's not just about that. It's also critical for kids who don't look like this to see and read books about different types of people. All children need to learn and know that there are lots of different kinds of people in this world. People that look different than they do, people that live in different places and have different types of families, that eat different kinds of foods and do different kinds of things. And all of that is okay. Because what they'll find in reading these books is that they're more alike than they are different. No matter what age we are, reading opens a window to discovery where we can learn and grow, where conversations can start and where questions and curiosities can arise, and where those questions can be answered. So please read to your children at this important time. Please encourage them to read to themselves if they can, and please engage in these conversations. It's so, so important. Please, please.
Okay, so you can kind of hear me begging at the end of that. I think I even cut off maybe 2 pleases because I was just, please start talking to your kids. So that became my goal, is to start and help families, start these conversations, because I know it's hard. It's an uncomfortable topic. People are afraid to say the wrong thing, but we just need to do it. So this is the program that came out of this also, Family Story Times on Race and Diversity that Patty was referring to, and that you can see on our Facebook page and our YouTube channel. But as we talk about talking with our kids about race, I wrote up a list of things for you to keep in mind. I put a big sticky on this that says just do it, because that's how I'm feeling right now. I just feel like there's an urgency to now that we have to just do it. I'm a procrastinator, and when I get to that point where Nike commercial is running in my head, that's it. Just do it, just do it. So who has to do it? You have to do it. You have to do it. As parents and guardians of your kids, you're the number one influence in their life. And if you don't say anything, then you're letting your silence speak for you. And you don't want to do that, because silence speaks volumes. And what it tells your kids is that the status quo is okay with you. And I know that's not true because you're here. And if you don't say anything, you're just leaving them wide open to the influences of other people. And there's so much information out there and crazy things coming at them. You don't want to let that happen. So you have to tell them your thoughts and your feelings and really where you stand and where you want your family to stand on these important issues. And so what are you going to do? You're going to have continual age-appropriate conversations. You know your kids, you know what they can handle, you know how to get through to them. And so you're going to have these conversations. It might be uncomfortable. You might say the wrong thing from time to time, but that's okay. You're going to admit it and move on. And the thing is that you're not having 2-hour lectures 3 times a week on the, history of racial oppression in America. You're not doing that. These are children, and most of them, their attention span is this long. You're just going to have 2-minute little conversations that you're going to bring up an idea, a theory, an opinion. You're going to ask them questions, just like you do when you're trying to reinforce other important values to your family, like taking care of yourself and being healthy, like being brave, fighting against bullying, girl power, whatever it is. You have to put race on that list and have it top of mind so that when opportunities arise, you can make those connections and plant those seeds and those thoughts and values with your kids. And where are you going to do that? Here, there, and anywhere. So sometimes there might be things that come up where you're going to want to say, remind me when we get home, there's something, that we should talk about. But you can have these little conversations anywhere. I think you should seize the moment when it arises. And when you got to do it now, meaning as far as your kids, whether they're 2, whether they're 8, 11, or 15, you need to start having these conversations now, because it's never too early. Studies show that children as young as 3 to 6 months old recognize skin color, and kids who are 5 and 6 years or 4 and 5 years old begin to exhibit bias and also begin to feel discrimination. So it's never too early. And also, kids just have so much more information coming at them now. So you got to get in there and make it known what you think. And it's never too late. If your kid is a teenager, that's a perfect time to have conversations, because they have so many opinions about so many things, and you can really hash it out with them. We already talked about the why, and the how is you're just going to expose them to as much diversity as you can in your community, through books, through shows, through music, food, people. You want to introduce them to people and widen your circle. Find ways to widen your circle, and you have to be the example. You have to be the example, because your kids are looking at you. And so one of the statistics I read was that 75% of white people have no friends of color. So while you're thinking about that for yourself and the people you know, Also think about, what do your coworkers look like? What shows do you watch and the characters in those shows? What books do you read? What food do you like to eat? What music do you listen to? Where do you go shop or go out for entertainment? All of these things your kids are watching, and what's good for you, they think is good for them. So you have to be the example and go along for the ride. Um, Okay, I quickly want to show you, I know I can talk and talk and talk. I don't know how long I've been talking, but I want to show you some of the running themes that come up in our family story times on race and diversity. These are some, just a few of the books that we've read. There's so many good books for children, you guys. And so one of the themes is, we're all different, but we're all the same. And that's a great subject that can come up all over the place. I put skeletons here because that's something that they talk about in this book, Let's Talk About Race. But there's skeletons all around us right now. It's Halloween. So you just say, oh my gosh, I saw so many skeletons today. And that got me thinking, skeletons are really cool, because even though we all look different on the outside, we all have skeletons, and you can't tell by looking at a skeleton if it was a Black person, a white person, a person with blonde hair and blue eyes, or brown hair and brown eyes. And you can go on and have a whole conversation, or you can just leave it at that as a little something that you come back to. Sharing stories is another great way to find connections with people, and also to find out how we're different and how we can celebrate those differences. So something important about sharing stories is that you need to share your stories too with your kids. Tell them about experiences that you've had, things where maybe like the tiger lion on the whiteboard, where you sat by and you saw something happen, but you didn't say anything or do anything, and now you feel bad about it. What do you wish you would have done? Ask your child what you think they could have done. Share those stories, so that, and you'll get a connection with them. And the more you talk about these things, the easier it gets. Window books and mirror books, I think Anne is going to talk about that. Mind, body, and spirit is something that I came up with. Well, it's been said before, but I want the kids to know that as they grow, we want them to grow strong in their mind and their body and their spirit, so that they are able to withstand some of the difficult times that they will surely have, whether it's regarding race or not, but also that they'll be strong enough to be a light and to be an example for other people, and that they'll know the difference between right and wrong, and that when the time comes, they'll be strong enough to stand up and be that person that can speak out. We talk about celebrating diversity, growing that circle of friendship, living by the golden rule, speaking up and speaking out for other people like you would want them to do for you. History has the word story in it. It's just a collection of stories over time. And the history that we get at school and in a lot of our books is very narrow. And we need to know that there are resources out there. We can be reading and learning about all different stories and the contributions of all different kinds of people to our history. And then we want to celebrate culture. Celebrate your own culture, because your kids need to know that and be proud of it. And then reach out and learn about other people's cultures. That's their food, that's their music, their art and literature, their religions. There's so many things to talk about. And all of these books have lessons and things that you can pull out of them. So I know I'm using up my time. I do have a list of references. There's so many websites and things that your kids are already familiar with, from Sesame Street to PBS Kids to Nick Jr. and HBO, that have articles and shows and activities about race for kids on them. And so we'll make sure that you
Share this.
get this. Yes. There is one website I wanted to share with you. It's this Raising Race Conscious Children. And that is a good resource, especially for people with young children, on really specifically how to talk to your kids, what vocabulary you should use. I mean, it's kind of academic, but it might be a good resource.
Maybe we can put these on the website, Sira.
Okay,
Right, okay?
I will do that. So
Okay.
use your resources, have your conversations. Don't be afraid to say the wrong thing. You can learn and grow with your kids. And I know this might frustrate Linda, but this is the generation that I'm counting on to save the world. And so we need to just raise them up in the way that we want them to go. And we're off to a good start here
For sure.
tonight. Thank you,
Thank
everybody.
you, Sira.
Pass it on to my friend
To
Anne.
Anne.
Thanks, Sira. I'm going to present my screen, and I just want to make sure I'm doing that correctly.
Sira, you want to take yours off?
Okay. Okay. I've mastered this on
You
Google.
did it. It's done.
Let's see how I do it with Zoom. Okay.
You did it.
Okay, great. I also, like Sira, I just want to thank Linda and the committee for inviting me to discuss this. And I do have to say that I've moved around quite a bit, and whenever I land in a new community, the first thing I do after I unpack the boxes is I seek out the local library. And so I came to Red Bank Public Library 10 years ago when my oldest son was 8 months old. And Sira and the librarians from the library have really been responsible for all of the stories that I share with my sons. And when Sira talks about and Linda acknowledges what Sira has done for that collection, it's very, very significant. I'd like to start by just also saying that I'm not an expert on this issue. I think a lot about it, and I reflect on it just both as an educator who has taught in both urban districts and in suburban districts, and also as a parent. My husband is African American, so my sons are biracial, and that's also been something that they've connected when Sira does her story series and she talks about that. That's very significant to them to know that she grew up just like they did. And so I think about it on this level of unpacking my own white privilege, but also knowing what it means to raise young Black sons and kind of helping them negotiate that. And one of the things that I've discovered during this pandemic is it's not just me doing it. There's an entire village of people within the local community, from the library to Monmouth Daycare Center to Red Bank Public Schools, that has been instrumental in teaching my kids how to accept others and approach individuals with compassion. So Linda she gave me a tough job. For over a month now, I've been kind of thinking about what I would say and what it is that I'm doing, both as a teacher of my students who come from a different background than that of my sons. And I started just by doing a lot of writing and thinking about kind of the stories that I have. And I realized that there's like 3 guiding principles that have shaped my instruction. The first thing is and I'm going to use students and my sons kind of interchangeably here, my children. And I'm also echoing a ton of ideas that Sira has already articulated. My classroom, as far as my classroom, I believe in creating a space where we ask questions all the time. And we're asking critical questions, and I believe in the importance of teaching young people to observe the world around them, from our physical surroundings to those things that are invisible, which are those norms. And when Sira talks about thinking about anti-racism work, like understanding where we're positioned within our communities. And I want my students and I want my kids to think about how we have been conditioned in a system that has some problems. And then the other thing that I think is really important is teaching young people to connect to their communities, because when they feel that connection to their community, they know that their members, they are going to feel more confident in articulating their voices and becoming active participants in their community. And I think so much of this work is about observing and not being sleepy. It's about being awake. And then the other thing too, both as a parent and as an educator, and like this is where Sira comes in big, is this idea of windows and mirrors, and making sure that young people have stories of people who not only look like them, but stories of people who don't look like them. And then finally, the way I have my things, okay. Finally, I think, like Sira says, we have to model this. We have to show young people that we're asking those questions as we go through our day-to-day lives, and that we're willing to be vulnerable. There's no answer key to this, but we're willing to recognize when we made a mistake, but then we're willing to revise our thinking. And so I'd like to just kind of start with a little bit of stories about how I kind of ended up on here, because how I ended up here influences everything about what it is that I do as a parent and as an educator. I grew up on a small farm in the middle of Michigan, on the traditional land of the Pura people. And I'm the oldest of 6 kids, and my parents believed in the food that we grow is the food that we, most of the food that we grow is the food that we eat in the winter. So we grew up kind of understanding the way that food systems work. We understood the importance of the worms and the honeybees, and how that all influenced the apples that we ate in the fall, or the applesauce that we ate in the winter. So what that did is that kind of prepared us for systems thinking, and this idea of understanding that there is a web at work here, and it's not linear. And while this doesn't automatically get you to institutional racism, I think kind of understanding that, I kind of understanding the role of food kind of leads one to thinking about food justice, and starting to note that where in some communities people have really easy access to food, whereas in other communities people are living in food deserts. And then eventually we start to see those other systems that are at play. Because in order to understand institutional racism, I think it's really important to see that it's part of a very intricate system that goes across time and across places. And so I think that's one of the first places to start with the really young people, is having something as simple as a garden or as a worm bin, just to teach them about systems, because this is about systems thinking. After I finished teaching, after I grew up in Michigan, I then moved to Brooklyn to become a teacher, and I started teaching I came to teaching with like a commitment to social justice and one multiculturalism in education class, and I was ready to bring my knowledge to my students. And I quickly discovered that it wasn't me bringing the knowledge to my students. It was my students bringing the knowledge to me. I think that I was kind of naively armed with the deficit model of education, kind of thinking that that children in poverty and children of color, that I was going to come in as the white savior with to help them survive in society. And kind of similar to the way we approached Indian boarding schools, rather than the fact that that my students had just a generation's worth of knowledge to bring to the classroom. And my role was just to tap into that. And there's 2 experiences that kind of stick out the most for me. Is one year we were taking our 8th graders to Colonial Williamsburg for a field trip. And as we were walking through the village, one of my students asked one of the tour guides, he said, "Where are the Black people?" And I kind of was like, that's kind of, what are you doing? And I've done some research, and it looks like Colonial Williamsburg is now doing, or maybe it was doing it at the time, but it looks like it's doing a lot more with African-American history. And maybe it was doing, like I said, it was doing this work at the time, but my students didn't see that. They didn't see themselves there at all. And I think that question is so, and whether or not it was there at the time, I just think that question is so important, because he was asking, are we telling the full story of the founding of our country? And that was a moment that kind of caused me to pause and help me get to where I am now, as far as, am I giving my students all of the stories of who we are. And then another time I was in Midtown with some students on 52nd Street at the Museum of TV and Radio. And one of my students turned to me, and this was an area that I went to all the time, or often. And one of my students turned to me and she said to me, Ms. Kelterborn, I'm so uncomfortable right now. And I didn't fully understand that. And so I pushed a little bit, and she said, there's only white people here. And it really, those two experiences really are among many that made me start to really think about my own privilege, and the fact that I could go through spaces and not have to think about my race in the same way that my students had to think about that. And so while I'm grateful for those lessons, I don't think it is the responsibility of Black, Indigenous people of color to educate me about the injustices they experience. And so thus began years of interrogating my own media diet and thinking about how I can put my own white privilege in check. And so there's things that I do as an educator and as a parent. Every school year, I begin the year with rereading James Baldwin's essay, A Talk to Teachers, in which, and I have the quote here, he writes, "The paradox of education is that as one begins to become conscious, one begins to examine the society in which he is being educated." And the entire essay, every year I read it, and it reminds me of the work that I'm doing. And in addition to that, I try to find texts, which our library wonderfully provides for us, that wrestle with these questions of like what it means to be an anti-racist. And I'll share this slideshow too. I've linked all of these texts. As far as a teacher perspective, the one I have in the far corner, Cultivating John's Genius by Dr. Goldie Muhammad, I read that this summer and it was fascinating. And it made me think a lot about the work that the T. Thomas Fortune House Foundation is doing, because it really looks at the way in which we are completely neglecting like these, in the past, these like Black literary societies, and the way that we in our schools have just have neglected that history. And then kind of similar to what Sira's saying, is just part of that work of interrogating my media diet is thinking about the novels that I'm reading. Am I reading novels that only tell the story of people who look like me and who have had the same experiences as I have had? Or am I exploring novels and voices that are different than my own? And then also, what films or TV shows am I watching? What are the podcasts that I'm listening to? And even what music I'm listening to. And fortunately, my husband, who loves music, has done so much to bring an appreciation for music that I probably would have never listened to on my own. And then the other thing is thinking about the circles that I'm in. Do I predominantly go into white only spaces? It's not lost on me that when I go to school and I go to work, that everyone I work with looks like me. And what is the impact of that on our students? And what are the conversations that I'm listening to? And I don't know who said this to me, but one time we were talking about when you hear those conversations that like, there's this set underneath though, you know, that underneath there's these things that people are thinking and saying that it just feels like, I think there's some racist conversation. I think that there's some problems with this conversation, rather than like, and sometimes, and I've witnessed it. Like I've been on soccer fields or at the park, and I hear the way folks are talking, and I don't know how to approach it. And someone said to me, just say to them, what makes you say that? And you get them to kind of name what's making them say that they can't send their kids into a certain space because the test scores aren't high enough. And so kind of asking that question, like that, what makes you say that? I think that's one small way that we can be activists. And then also too with our children and with our students, when they say certain things, asking them what makes you, what makes you say that. And before I kind of talk about my teaching, I'd like to bring up, and I didn't think I'd have enough to say, but I have way too much to say. So Linda, cut me off when need be. I was watching this documentary, Columbus in America, with my sons a couple of weeks ago. And the narrator said, Indian removal, slavery, and the exploitation of nature within the US had flourished as a joint adventure. And I paused and wrote that down because I think so much of doing anti-racist work is about looking at the web and like the way, not the World Wide Web, but just that invisible web that exists, and the way in which all of these things are interconnected. Because I don't think we can look at one social injustice on its own. And like, we can't just say like, let's recycle, or let's just, on Martin Luther King Day, we'll honor Black history. I think that this is it. I remember someone saying, racism is in the air that we breathe. And so it's this web. And my question has always been is, how do I get young people to see that? And so one of the ways that I've done that work, that I think I've done that work with my sons, is this idea of looking at our physical environments. And so like, as my sons and I walk through Red Bank, we walk through and I ask questions like, what do we notice? And what does that communicate about what our community values? So things like, we notice Two River Theater, and we know that we go there and we've seen really good shows, and we've seen people that look like us. We notice that lunch break exists. We notice that our community is trying to help out those in need. Why do we have, why do some people not have access to food while others do have access or can go to fancy restaurants? The T. Thomas Fortune House, which tells which celebrates the history of T. Thomas Fortune and other African Americans, and even things like the bike lanes. And we talk about, we don't see very many bike lanes. What does that communicate to us? And well, it communicates to us that we center automobile culture over pedestrian and biking culture. And I think starting that work with like young people, just like getting them to notice and think about, what does this communicate about our values? I think then we can start to zoom out a little bit and get them to start to notice some of those things, get them to start to notice those other things. Sorry, I have to look at my notes. I think it connects to I know why. It connects to anti-racist work, because one of the things that I heard following the death of George Floyd was I heard all this conversation from many people about how they never realized that how powerful a force racial inequity is within the United States. And while I'm really grateful that people were that institutional racism started to become a conversational topic, it also really saddened me that it took that long for it to become a topic. And so it made the work of for me, the work as an educator and the work that I think we need to do as parents, it made it all the more urgent. We need our young people to start to ask those questions, and to start to move beyond to look at the physical environment and the rules and the rules and norms and the values within our community. And so I try to do the same work with my students. So we do a unit on media studies. And when we start that unit, I ask the students, just with a clipboard in hand, we walk through the school building, and we know, like, what is it that we see in our building, from the trophy cases to, where the science classrooms are situated versus where the English classrooms are situated. What does that communicate to us about what we value? And then I try to get students to zoom out a little bit and to start to pay attention to their own communities, and what they're observing. Their community may not look the same way that other communities look, and while that may be okay on some levels, are there some environments that may be lacking the resources they need? And who do we see that is in those environments? Why? And what are the hidden rules and norms within our larger society that allows for that? And those are questions that I'm hoping that my students ask kind of long after they leave my classroom. In addition, Yes.
I want to give, make sure that definitely our audience has time to ask some questions. So maybe just 1 minute and we'll wrap it up and see if we have questions.
Great.
Okay?
Great, Linda. Thank
Okay.
you. So
Sure.
I'm just going to leave it with just another aspect of that is kind of the kind of 5 guiding questions for media literacy, and kind of whenever we look at a text, whether it's a Patagonia ad or a Nike commercial or the front page of national newspapers, these 5 kind of guiding questions: who created the message, what techniques are used, and I think the most important question is the 4th question, like what values, lifestyles, and points of view are represented or omitted from the message. And I bring in Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse because after we saw that movie, as we were leaving the movie theater, my son turned to me and said, "Mom, Spider-Man looked just like me. I could be Spider-Man." And I think that speaks to that idea of windows and mirrors that Sira brings up. And so I'm just going to conclude with that idea of teaching our young people to ask, like modeling that the asking of questions and being observant and being present. And I'll leave it at that. So I apologize for taking.
Oh, don't apologize. It's all been wonderful. It just sometimes like we have questions from our audience. I just want to make sure that they have time to ask questions to both you and Sira. So with that, we can open it up to the floor. If anybody does have a question, you can put it in the chat or you can just unmute yourself and ask a question.
So yes, I just want to thank Anne and Sira for a really wonderful perspective on this whole issue. And especially, I think it was you, Sira, that mentioned that when we're teaching our children, we're also challenging ourselves and examining our own hearts. And I just want to say also that I'm glad you shared that picture at the end of Miles Into the Spider-Verse, because my 7-year-old grandson positively adores him and is going to be Miles, or was last year for Halloween, because he just latched right onto him, and he's a little white boy. So there is a power in this imagery. And just one more thing about Sira. You know, you can see how wonderful she is. And if you go into the library, and I've gone in with my little grandson, and she just, the children are attracted to her, she's attracted to them, and there's just, you can just feel the love there. So I'm really thrilled that we had the 2 of you here tonight. We will be ending by 8:30, but as Linda mentioned earlier, we'll keep the line open a little later for anyone who wants to kind of stay and chat. In the meantime, I hope that if anyone has questions for our presenters or stories they'd like to share on this subject, we would really love to hear from you. I don't just put it into the chat or unmute yourself, since you'll be the first in line. There's nobody waiting.
Rosie?
Yes. I just wanted to say to Anne, her comment about Spider-Man. My husband's African-American. We have a 15-year-old daughter. In fact, you know her, Sarah. She did the presentation for the Black Lives Matter.
Oh,
And yeah,
Yeah.
that's my daughter.
Yeah.
Just Anne's comment about Spider-Man. Sarah said when Tiana came, the first Black Disney princess, I remember going into the Disney store with her and my husband, and she said, "Finally, a princess that looks like me." And, you know, it was just, I never thought about it because, you know, I grew up in Ireland. I grew up around white people. To me, a princess was, you know, a Disney princess was a Disney princess. You just dress up and you go on about your way. But it was much more for Sarah. She wanted to look like her, and she did. So
That's great. Oh, thanks for sharing that, Rosa. Anybody else?
I really loved what Anne said about, or was it Sira? I'm sorry. It was asking people when they
I have a
say
question. Oh,
something.
sorry.
Dolly?
Yes, it's okay. I'll wait for her to
Yes,
finish.
go ahead.
Go ahead, Dolly.
Okay, so I was asking the question because the lady who just presented, she said that she made a statement similar to, she knows what it is to bring up Black boys in America. So I'm just wondering, as a woman who is married to an African American, and your children are biracial, how does that play out for you in your mind? So do you accept that they're just Black because that's how everybody views them, because traditionally when you have one drop of Black, you're Black? Or do you sometimes refer to them as white or mixed? I'm just curious about that.
Thanks, Dolly. That's a great question, and it's something my husband and I talk about. My thought on it is, I mean, while they might be biracial in the check boxes, is the idea that when the world sees them, they are seen as African, as Black, and so that's where it's complicated, Dolly, because I'm a white woman raising them, but I hope that I'm doing and my husband is a Black man raising them, but I want them to know there are, like, when we talk about things like the death of George Floyd and Trayvon Martin, for them to understand that as Black bodies in the United States, there are challenges that they may confront, and how do we protect ourselves against those? So, yeah, I hope that answered your question.
Hello.
Hi, Sid.
Hi. I was just thinking, and I've thought it for a while, I think the only way that we're going to defeat racism is when kids in preschool learn acceptance and respect. And within a generation, maybe we might eliminate racism. But just to talk like we're talking, and I've talked, and I have a group, and we do so well, and we do a lot of nice things, it's almost like an impossibility to change. We try to make some changes. Our group is diversified, and I have to tell you that we're going on our 6th year. And I think the last 2 years, Linda and Sira and everybody else there, it opened up. It was like an awakening. Our African-American women started to talk about how they feel and what they're afraid of for their children and themselves every day of their lives. And that didn't happen the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, or 4th year. And I think maybe it's promising that maybe more will open up in the next few years. I hope so. Patty?
Sid, it's interesting. Sometimes, like with this program, it feels like, oh, you're preaching to the choir.
Right,
The
yeah.
truth is that if one person from this program goes out and does one of the things that has been encouraged in the program, and then after that another thing, and then maybe they talk to a friend, things do. I know we're impatient at this point. We should be. It's enough. And you're tired of talking, but things are changing, I think, in a way that they haven't before. Let's hope anyway.
Yeah.
Bon-
It's life
Bonnie,
and hope, right?
I want to
Okay.
add on to what Dolly said. The question of Anne. Those are my children, and they know that they're children of color. Our family is, the Rainbow Coalition. We have like all walks of like genres in our family. So both families have been very accepting of us and them, and they are very loved. So, I think, just like, I don't know what I'm trying to say, but like, Anne's doing a good job of like raising kids of color of like that, but she's, she does like more than like, any parent, out there as far as like, like with reading and stuff like that. So, yeah, the kids know that they're children of color. So like, they know what they are. So she doesn't have to really explain that to them.
I'll throw in there from my experience, because I did one of these family story times on race and diversity about being biracial. And so I told you a little bit about my experience and being, kind of isolated as just me and my brother. But our family, I mean, the way we grew up, we were loved, we were involved, we had fun, we had friends. It was a happy childhood, and I'm not complaining about that at all. But like Jermaine said, our family was like a little, utopia in and of itself. We didn't talk about race. Everybody did the same thing. Everybody was involved in the same things. And it didn't come up. And that was kind of a problem when we moved out of our home and out of our community. And like Anne said, the world sees you, they don't know you. This is how they see you, and you're a Black, you kind of have to know that you're a person of color and what that means in this world, and what, you need to expect, and what you're gonna be up against. You kind of have to. And to her point too, when you told the story about your student saying, there's all white people here. I always tell this story of one of my family members who came to visit me here in Red Bank and came to church with us at a Black church, and sitting in the congregation and whispering to me, I'm the only white person. And I was like, oh, how does that matter? I didn't say anything. I was just like, yeah. But I mean, like, how did that make you feel? Obviously, you never had to think about that before. And that is how I felt like a lot of times with you in lots of places. So it's just interesting. We have to be able to shift our perspective and think about how other people, are experiencing the world.
And I just want to say that for some reason tonight's topic is hitting me, and I'm very emotional about it. Like Sira, hearing you speak, and hearing you speak. I don't know. I kept turning my camera off because like tears just kept like running down my eyes. And I identify with you when you said that you grew up in a utopia, because I too grew up in a utopia. I grew up in Fairhaven, where I was one of the only families of color in Fairhaven. In fact, Sira, your husband, was also one of the few other families of color in Fairhaven. And, honestly, I never had issues of race in my hometown growing up. When I did when I was in high school. I felt some of the things in high school. I went to high school locally, not in Fairhaven. And I decided that I wanted to attend a historically Black college and university because I did not know so much about my people. And what I knew was what I saw on television did not reflect my family, my family's morals, my family's characters. And I realized, like, wait, all Black people are not the way they're being portrayed. And so I'm like, and I too, Sira, like you, felt more comfortable around white people than I did Black people because I had not been around many Black people. And when I stepped foot on Howard University's campus for the first time, I was in awe. For the first time, I saw thousands of people that represented me. They spoke like me, they talked like me, they had the same norms and values, and they believed in education. And I'm like, this is what I've always known of Black people, but this is not what's portrayed amongst the media. My friends in high school, they would say things like to me, like, you're different from the other Black people. And I would say to myself, like, I'm not different from the other Black people. Like, you've got the wrong perception. And then when I was there living in Washington, D.C., I met my husband who grew up in Pittsburgh, and his growing up was different than mine. I remember brought him home for the first time, and the police went to the neighbor's door and rang her doorbell. And I just saw my husband freeze, and I said, "What's wrong with you?" And he's like, "Why are the cops going to your neighbor's house?" And my mom replied, "Oh, she probably has a ticket. They're just reminding her to do something." And he's like, "It's not like that, like where I'm from. Like, it's not like that." And I recall, like, being in Washington and seeing the incidences of police brutality and the times where my husband has had guns drawn on him just simply for being. And I'm like, wait a second, like, this is not how I've grown up. And I quickly learned that my utopia was not like everyone else's. And fast forward, that I really learned that when I moved back home and I moved out of the town of Fairhaven, one town over to Red Bank, and began working in Red Bank. And I really learned for the first time, wow, like, I'm experiencing racism. I am experiencing it, and it hurts. And, I guess I'm so emotional because I see all the faces here on the calls, and it's hopeful. Like, it's hope. It gives me like joy to see the faces, and to hear you talk about your boys, and to hear the work that you put into it. And I see Maureen, and I see Laura Bagwell, and the people that I know, who I feel like, from my knowing you, I'm not surprised that you're on this call. But these are the few, like, I think we all know that when we go out of this environment, like, there's a big wall there that that we have to educate more people. We have to bring more people onto these calls, and get their hearts and their minds to change. And I'm encouraged to see Hillary and, like, the kids that are here. Like, it starts with them. And then I'm just gonna say one more thing, and I'll be quiet, because my experience, like I said, I had to go through an education and move out of this area to go to a university. But there are many schools in this area that they perpetuate this, like, like the better school systems, the ones where you want your kids to go to, but you don't have the opportunities for your kids to go there because of economics or whatever. And I'm just going to put it out there, I have had the opportunity for my children to go to some of these schools, and in these schools, like, they're still the only, like, and when they're the only, they're dealing with having to prove that they're just as smart, or they deserve to be there. And it's just, it's frustrating. It's frustrating. And it's like, how do we bridge that gap? How do we, like, go to these places and say, you know what, you need to do a better job with diversity. Diversity is not a bad word. Like, it's you're doing better for your kids when you allow them to understand that there are others than them that can make a difference in the world. So anyway, that's my rant.
Simone, I just want to say in the chat, someone wrote that preaching to the choir is a way to create more choir masters. So keep that in mind.
Well, thank
Well,
you.
yeah, and that, thank you so much for sharing all that, Mamon. That was really wonderful perspective. And honestly, it does appear the people who are here tonight, everyone who comes to our programs, does have an interest in this. And I appreciated what Anne shared about one approach we can take when you hear somebody saying something that isn't quite right. Especially, people have a tendency to talk in code. They'll make this comment, and you think you know what they mean, and it's not nice. And you don't want to have a fight, but you can say, well, maybe why would you, or what makes you say it that way, and just get them to explain, and maybe it'll awaken something in them. There was, Bonnie's been putting some things in the chat. Did you want to share anything, Bonnie? Do you want to unmute yourself? Or not, it's okay. Or anyone else have
She is
Yeah,
Linda, your
just-
com-
I just wanted to say one thing, and while I don't disagree with Sid that getting kids to accept diversity is a very important part of this, we can't lose sight of the need to address and fight the institutional racism that exists, the disparity in education, the disparity in the wealth disparity, the food system disparity, the employment disparity, all those things. They're not necessarily what we're talking about tonight, but those are things that go beyond just people accepting each other for who they are. So I just wanted to point that out. That's all.
Exactly. Everything is interconnected. I think Anne tried to make that point very well.
So I do have a question for Anne, if I might. I love your presentation and asking the questions. How, and this ties to the beginning of our conversation, Linda, that we had earlier. So our children, right? We can teach our children to be anti-racist, to be diverse, to accept all of that. But then if they go back into environments where that is being taught, how does that work? And then have you in your role, because I can tell by your reading, it probably forms and shapes the way that you deliver your curriculum. Have any parents given you pushback for that?
Kerwin, thank you for that question. And I had a much, like I said, I had a way longer presentation. That was a part of my presentation.
And you can come back.
Oh, no, it's totally
No, we're doing a whole other program.
okay. That was a part of, as I was starting to talk about teaching, and actually two of my wonderful colleagues that I've worked with in New Jersey, Carol Ewig and Lynn Bear, are on this call. And with them both on when I worked in the middle school and now in the high school level that I work in, it's working with them that has helped, just knowing I had allies, and we managed to really diversify our curriculum. And now I'm kind of on my own in the school building that I'm in. And so I get nervous and scared about pushback. At this point, I haven't gotten any pushback. And I kind of was thinking about what Mamone was saying. Having taught in both urban school districts and suburban school districts, I am much more scared out here teaching what I taught when I taught in New York City. In New York, I taught a film class. So I showed Do the Right Thing, and I never thought twice about it. In New Jersey, every year when I'm about to show Spike Lee's Do the Right Thing, I get scared. At this point, I haven't heard any pushback. Maybe my administrators hide it from me, but I am also really, really careful about how I frame things. I frame it as if, those 5 questions that we ask when we engage with media, those are basic media literacy questions. This is what we ask. I'm not trying to push an agenda. When we view a film, I make it clear, we are viewing this film and we are looking, when we watch Do the Right Thing, we are watching that to look at, this is considered a timeless film. What are the criteria for a timeless film? Does that criteria apply to the film? And one of the things, especially this year, when after having viewed that film, I had a student respond to me and said to me, I never realized when we were watching it, I didn't realize how important that film was, and that it was speaking to, it was made 30 years ago and it's still telling the exact same story of racial violence. And so a lot of it is about that approach, that same thing of what makes you say that? And I try not to, I just try to model asking questions. And so far, knock on wood, I haven't, at this point, I haven't gotten any pushback. So watch tomorrow, I get an email.
No.
No doubt.
Can I interject?
Yes.
I wanted to respond to Anne and to what Mamone says. I've been a teacher I've been in teaching for about 25 years. And I have to be honest and say that I find it easier to teach about race when I'm in, it's not the best teaching, but when I am in an all-white classroom. And I think that speaks to one of the greatest problems we have here in New Jersey. You can teach acceptance and
Respect.
racial cast in a white classroom, but you can't get a real conversation when you're teaching to one audience. And I mean, that sounds like a downer, but I think that that is the real problem that we're facing. And Mamone, I live in Fairhaven, and I look at, my kids go to school, and I think Fairhaven does a good job of trying to incorporate diversity and so forth. But I don't, they go to school every day, and they don't see the diversity that's being taught to them. And I think that has to be acknowledged.
Thank
To
you
that
so much.
point, I just want to say I raised 3 young men and in an all white community. And honestly, after we originally got our house, and later on I learned this was like a Ku Klux Klan town. But I think if you live in a town like that, it's more important than ever to go to towns where there is diversity, to take your children into Elizabeth, to New York City, to Newark, expose them to different experiences. Again, your books come into play. Even if kids in the classroom are all the same color, and quite frankly, many of them were quite prejudiced, but if you're in your own little unit showing your children diversity, I think it's more important than if you live in a diversified community, quite frankly.
That's a great point, Linda. We have about 5 more minutes. I just wanted to tell you that we will be having a program in November. It's usually the last Wednesday of the month, but that will be the night before Thanksgiving. Therefore, we're moving it up to November 18th. We're still working on finalizing the presenters and the actual title of the program, but we're pretty sure we want to be able to talk about issues surrounding the election results and that general theme. Also, as we try to say every time, we are happy to help anyone that would like to start a similar program in your own community. We love Red Bank, but we would like to see this duplicated in as many areas as possible. So please reach out to us. There was a comment earlier by Audrey. I don't know if you want to speak up or anyone else.
Hi, I would like to just say one thing to Ann and Sira. Thank you so much for talking about that. We really have to have conversations with our children, because I've raised my children without calling people Black or Hispanic. Just, I've always called them people. I don't really like to use the terms, but it worked well for a while. My daughter in preschool used to bring home pictures where she colored people in shades, and it was awesome. Like the doctor was Black, and you could tell she made somebody a little bit darker, but not really white. And it was lovely for a while. But as she gets older, I just recently had a conversation with her in the car, listening to one of the podcasts that Ann just showed us, Nice White Parents. And she asked me about it and said, "What is this about?" And I said, "Well, it's about segregation in the school system." And she said, "Oh, well, that's not allowed anymore." I was like, very true, but it's still going on in our country. I said, "So this is about how it's going on." And she said, "Oh," she's like, "Well, I'm so happy that that's not the case in my school." And I was laughing because I just know that she's like one of the only white kids in her school, or in her class, not in her school. So I was like, she still doesn't see the color, like she doesn't see it. And I think it's great. But I loved how you guys talked about how, when she gets older, if somebody says something or does something or posts something, and she's not looking for that N word, right? Or those things, and she's oblivious, she's never going to be able to speak up, and she's never going to be able to ask those questions. So I appreciate you guys just talking about this today, because I'm going to definitely get my son some books too from the library, of just diverse books, because I think that this is really important to have more conversations and not really just kind of pretend like it's not there. And that color, we're all one. Well, we're really all different, and we all need to know that. So I really appreciate all of that today. Thank you.
And celebrate those differences, for heaven's sakes. That's fabulous. It's a great thing that we're different and we have different cultures. It's a reason to be celebrating.
I think there was a time when teaching kids to be colorblind was the way that people thought was a great idea. If we're all just one, you know, happy human race, then we won't have any problems. But really recognizing and being able to name, and it's okay to say that person is Black and that, you know, that person is Asian, and just name them and recognize that they're different, but also that we do have so much that we share. And I love what you said, Dina. So thank you. You're on the right track.
And I just, I'd like to say I'm Patty White's daughter, the mother of the little Miles Morales fan. And, you know, I mean, being raised by my parents, I think was it was a unique experience for a lot of white Americans, because we did talk about racial issues around the dinner table. My parents called out racism and encouraged us to as well. And so that was always kind of the norm for me. And it was, like I said, I came to realize later as I got older how unique that was. You know, talking to my white friends, and, you know, they'll say something just really kind of, you know, that casual racism that white people tend to let slip when it's just white people in the room. And, you know, and I never hesitated to call them out on it. It was never, you know, it was never a question. And so, I mean, I'm doing my best to, you know, to duplicate that with my sons. I think especially raising, you know, white boys who are kind of the top of the social echelon. Like it's, you know, it's important for my husband and I to, you know, to have the tough conversations and to make sure that they recognize their privilege in every way. And, you know, I think one of the best experiences for me was how often I would find myself as the only white person in the room. It's helpful to put yourself into that situation. And that was, you know, growing up, that was very common, where my family might be the only white family in the room, whether we're, you know, we had a lot of Persian friends. We lived for a year on the Navajo Nation. And so we were around, you know, a lot of Native Americans. Then we moved to Red Bank, and I went through the Red Bank Middle School and, you know, Red Bank Regional. And I was taking classes like Minorities in America. And I went to Rutgers and took classes on the Harlem Renaissance. And it's because I was taught to just embrace that discomfort and sit with it. And eventually it's not uncomfortable anymore. And I think that I would just encourage people that, you know, to do that as much as you possibly can. Make yourself the only white person in the room and listen.
I'll send you your check later, Laylee. That was great. Thanks. Oh my gosh. Okay, everybody, this was wonderful. We really should, we don't want to take advantage of people's time. We're officially over, but like I said, we're going to keep this line open till about 9. If folks want to hang out and just chat.
And just one thing, Patty, I just want to encourage everyone, please tell people about this program, especially people that aren't like-minded, that, you know, could join us, and maybe it will open up their thinking a bit. If anything we're learning from this time, whatever happens with this election, we need to heal. And we can only do that if we listen to one another and, you know, hear what other people have to say. So, you know, if you could do that in the next month or two, we'd really appreciate it.
Patty?
Yes.
I see where you got your liberalism from.
You inherit it from your children. Yeah, my
Well,
kids have really straightened me out.
They'll continue to.
Very informative evening. Very nice.
Thank you so
everyone
much,
for
everybody,
coming.
for joining us.
Thank you.
Lovely.
Well, is
And
anybody
thanks,
gonna hang around?
I'll be here.
I'm hanging.
Thank you. I'm
Thank you,
hanging.
Sierra, for bringing this book to the Red Bank Public Library.
Oh, that's an
I didn't
adult
know
book,
that.
but I'm glad you
Sorry
got
about
it.
Black.
Yeah, well, we actually have really, really changed the adult collection. You know, I mean, we actually can do displays on diverse books, whereas before we were lucky to have a couple copies of Walter Mosley's fiction. So it's not just
Can I
the
see that
children's
book?
department, it's the adult department too. We're progressing.
Driving While Black. Okay.
Dolly, it's also a documentary on Amazon, I believe. And it's,
Oh, okay. Thank you.
it's excellent. It would be a text I definitely recommend.
Thanks.
I wanted to react to what Laylee said as far as the importance of gaining that other perspective and knowing your privilege, because I witnessed a conversation the other day that was kind of disturbing. It was two like teenage boys, one black and one white, and the black one happened to be my nephew. And so these were a group of kids that I knew, but they were talking about shoplifting, which apparently is really a way to stick it to the man these days. So they think it's pretty cool. And, you know, the white boy is like, oh, you know, when people see me, they're just like, go ahead. It's no big deal. You know, I won't tell anybody. And he's saying this to all these kids. And I'm thinking, you're talking to this brown boy here. And I don't want him to think that it's okay to, you know, just grab something off the shelf and stick it in his jacket. And I think, you know, there needs to be some understanding of different experiences that these kids have. And yeah, that is still sitting with me, that conversation. I don't like it at all.
Right. One of the things I remember that always used to stick with me, Sierra, was when I was one of the onlys in school, we would have conversations. And I distinctly remember that same sort of conversation, having the conversation about like shoplifting in stores. And I would think to myself, wow, like, how do you get away with that? Like, like, first of all, I remember working in a store and being told that when certain individuals come in the store to follow them. And so I knew that experience as a person, as a young kid who had worked in a store, and then a person who, when I went into stores, I would be followed. So to me, it was just like mind blowing. And even also like the instances of like, you know, young kids, sometimes they do things that they're not supposed to do and maybe dabble with things that they're not supposed to dabble with. I just remember like the school that I went to, the private school that I went to, when those kids would do those things, the outcomes and the punishments would not be the same from the kids that I would hear across the other side of town that were a little darker. And it just blew my mind. And I just always knew, I'm like, okay, I don't know where it came from, but I knew that you could watch it, but you could never be a part of it, because for you, Mamone, the consequences will be much greater. And it hasn't changed, you know? And so I get that feeling when you're seeing someone say that to your nephew, particularly it being your nephew, because of the close proximity to you and you knowing the truth of what those outcomes, how different they are for both boys.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure it's still true, but I know a couple years ago, the statistic was the largest number of shoplifters were white, middle-aged, bored women that were shoplifters. I mean, it was a really great percentage compared to everyone else. Yeah. Anybody else? We still have 20 people with us, so there must be some questions. Otherwise, that's all we've got.
Linda, Linda,
You're
Yeah.
right,
Yes,
that's it.
Sid.
We've done what we can do.
can I make a suggestion for another Let's Talk About Race?
Oh, we love suggestions.
I would suggest maybe getting 3 or 4 biracial couples
Mm-hmm. We've
And-
actually talked about that.
and have them discuss their feelings and experiences and so on. I think that would be very interesting.
Okay, great. Well, the important thing is that we tell people stories, and once you hear the stories, it might just change you a little bit.
Yeah.
So, you know, I try to remember to mention other community conversations, and I did forget to mention to the group, but there's going to be a book club. Do you want to tell more about
Yeah,
that,
I
Linda?
should have. I definitely should have included that.
November
I'm really
16th?
sorry. It's November the 16th. It's on Isabel Wilkerson's. I've actually got like 40 people already signed up for this book club. It's in conjunction with T. Thomas Fortune and Two River Theater, as well as the library. And the book we're reading is Cast by Isabel Wilkerson. I'm only into it like by about 100 pages, but it is quite interesting. She discusses the 3 caste systems of India, Nazi Germany, and America. And, you know, she speaks in term, she's very understandable. And I really recommend the book. And if you want to join us, it's another Zoom program. We tried it last time, our book club, the back of the library, but we had a lot of seasoned women, and climbing up that hill was not easy. And November 16th is going to be probably a nippy evening. So we're doing it via Zoom, 7 p.m. If you go on registration, you'll be able to register for the Multicultural Book Club.
Indeed.
And Patty, I'm so sorry I didn't mention it earlier. But
I'm going to have to start making a list of all the things I want to remember as well. You know,
I
you
do.
think I have that down by now, right?
yeah, I do, but it doesn't always get everything.
Then you have to look at the list. I know.
Exactly.
Yeah, I've been reading the book. It's interesting. Her writing style is beautiful, so it's easy to read in that sense.
Yeah, but
And in
hard
the other
in
sense, it's
content.
devastating. It's
Yeah.
just crushing.
It is.
She exposes everything and everybody. So
The
be prepared.
content is really tough, but as you said, it's beautifully written. So it keeps you wanting more, even though after I find like 20 pages, I got to put it down and do something else.
And as hard as it is to read, I thought, how hard was it for her to write? Oh,
I
my
can't
God.
imagine. I really
Yeah.
can't. But anybody else?
Nice to see you, ladies. I haven't
Oh,
seen
it's
you for
so
a long
great.
time.
Hey, yeah.
We also have to announce next time for people to show their faces. I want to see everyone's faces. I mean, it's black boxes just doesn't quite cut it. You know, it just seeing faces right now, it really soothes the soul.
Well, it's nice to see.
Anyway,
Nice to see friendly faces.
Okay, I'm going to end it, everyone. Okay.
all right. Good
Okay.
night, folks. Thank you,
Thank
Ann and
you.
Sarah.
Thank you.
So,
Thank
so
you,
good.
dear.
Bye,
And
friends.
Everybody.
Sarah, you can
Yeah.
now breathe.
Very nice.
Do
Thank
so
you.
much.
Breathing.
Good night.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
So you'll share our presentations with the distribution list, I guess?